Your honesty is not the problem. It has never been the problem. The problem is what honesty exposes. It shines a light into places where comfort has been built on silence, where connection has been mistaken for compliance, and where belonging has been offered only in exchange for self-abandonment. Honesty has been unfairly blamed for the damage it reveals. We say things like, "If you hadn't said anything, everything would have been fine," as if silence is what holds relationships together. But honesty doesn't ruin what is healthy, grounded, and mutual. It simply brings into view what was already strained, already misaligned, already asking for attention. Truth doesn't create cracks, it shows us where the foundation was weak. When something falls apart after honesty enters the room, it's tempting to believe the truth was too much. But more often, what couldn't survive was the illusion. Many connections are quietly built on unspoken agreements. Don't question this, don't name that feeling, don't disrupt the balance. As long as everyone plays their part, things seem stable. Honesty disrupts that performance. It interrupts the script. And disruption can feel like destruction when comfort has been mistaken for connection. There is a deep fear beneath this blame. We fear that if we speak honestly, we'll lose love, belonging, or safety. So we protect the relationship by protecting the lie. We minimize our needs. We dilute our feelings. We tell ourselves it's not worth the trouble. But what we're really doing is postponing the truth. And postponed truth doesn't disappear, it compounds. It shows up later as resentment, burnout, emotional distance, or sudden endings that feel out of nowhere. Honesty is not loud. It doesn't have to be cruel or dramatic. At its core, honesty is an act of respect. It says, "I trust you enough to let you see me clearly." And it also says, "I respect myself enough not to disappear." When honesty is met with defensiveness or punishment, that reaction tells a story. Not about the person who spoke, but about the limits of the space they spoke into. Healthy relationships don't collapse under truth, they grow stronger through it. They bend, adjust, and sometimes have hard conversations that reshape how connection works. Honesty becomes the bridge to repair, not the weapon of rupture. And when a relationship cannot tolerate truth, what's being protected isn't love, it's control, comfort, or avoidance. Letting honesty reveal what's real can be painful. It may mean grieving relationships that were sustained by silence. It may mean acknowledging that something you tried to save was never built to hold your whole self. But clarity is not cruelty. Truth is not betrayal. Honesty doesn't ruin what is real, it makes room for it. Silence has a quiet way of turning truth against us. When we don't say what needs to be said, the truth doesn't vanish, it retreats inward. It settles into our bodies, our thoughts, our sense of self. What begins as an unspoken feeling slowly transforms into something heavier, something more corrosive. Silence doesn't keep the peace, it internalizes the conflict. And over time, that conflict becomes shame. When honesty is met with dismissal, ridicule, or punishment, many of us learn a dangerous lesson. My truth is the problem, so we stop sharing. We tell ourselves we're being mature, low-maintenance, understanding. But beneath that restraint is fear. Fear of being seen as difficult, ungrateful, or too much. Instead of questioning the environment that couldn't hold our honesty, we question ourselves. We begin to believe that our needs are inconvenient and our feelings are flaws. Shame thrives in this quiet. It whispers that if we were stronger, kinder, or more evolved, we wouldn't feel this way at all. It convinces us that discomfort is a personal failure rather than a signal asking for attention. And because shame grows in isolation, silence becomes its greatest ally. The less we name our truth, the more power shame gains over our identity. What's especially damaging is that silence often masquerades as self-control. We're praised for being calm, agreeable, and resilient, but emotional suppression isn't strength, it's disconnection. When we consistently swallow our truth, we don't just lose our voice, we lose our ability to trust ourselves. Our inner compass becomes unreliable because we've trained it to point away from discomfort instead of toward honesty. The body keeps its own record of this silence. Unspoken truths show up as tension, exhaustion, irritability, and numbness. The mind follows, replaying conversations we never had, rewriting moments where we wished we'd spoken up. Over time, the question shifts from "why didn't they listen to me?" to "why am I like this?" And that shift is the birth of shame. Breaking the silence doesn't require confrontation or conflict in every moment. It begins with acknowledging the truth to ourselves, without judgment, without minimizing. It means recognizing that feelings are not indictments, they are information. When truth is named, even privately, shame loses its grip. Light disrupts it. Language weakens it. Silence turns truth into shame, but honesty turns shame back into truth, something understandable, human, and workable. When we allow ourselves to speak, even softly, we reclaim our dignity. We remember that our experiences are valid and our voices deserve space. Honesty doesn't just express truth, it measures capacity. When we speak openly, we are not only sharing our experience, we are discovering how much emotional space a person, a relationship, or a system actually has. The response to honesty is rarely about the words themselves. It is about whether the listener has the capacity to sit with discomfort, to reflect instead of react, and to stay present when the narrative shifts. Capacity shows up in small, telling moments. It's revealed in whether someone listens without interrupting, whether they get curious instead of defensive, whether they can tolerate the idea that they may have caused harm without collapsing into shame or lashing out in blame. When honesty is met with denial, minimization, or anger, that reaction tells a clear story, not that the truth was wrong, but that the space was limited. Many of us mistake emotional intensity for emotional capacity. Someone can be loud, confident, and opinionated yet deeply unable to hold another person's truth. Real capacity is quieter. It looks like steadiness. It sounds like, I need a moment, but I want to understand, rather than, you're overreacting. Capacity allows room for multiple realities to coexist without demanding that one be erased. When people lack capacity, honesty feels like an attack to them. Not because it is aggressive, but because it challenges the story they need to feel safe or in control. In those moments, truth becomes inconvenient. It threatens identity, power, or comfort. So the instinct is to shut it down by changing the subject, questioning motives, or turning the focus back onto the person who spoke. This is not a failure of honesty. It is a boundary being revealed. Understanding honesty as a measure of capacity is liberating. It helps us stop personalizing reactions that were never about us. It allows us to see that being misunderstood or dismissed doesn't mean we communicated poorly. It may mean we were speaking beyond what that space could hold. And that clarity matters because it informs where we invest our vulnerability. This doesn't mean walking away from every difficult reaction. Capacity can grow when there is willingness and accountability, but growth requires ownership, not defensiveness. It requires curiosity, not control. When honesty is met with effort, even clumsy effort, it signals potential. When it's consistently met with punishment, it signals a limit. Honesty is not just self-expression, it's information. It tells us where safety lives, where repair is possible, and where our truth will always be too heavy. Recognizing this allows us to choose our relationships with wisdom instead of self-doubt. Courage is often misunderstood as confrontation, volume, or emotional force, but real courage is much quieter than that. Courage sounds like naming the hurt without turning it into an accusation. It sounds like saying, "That mattered to me," or "This affected me more than I expected," even when your voice shakes and your hands feel unsteady. It is the willingness to be seen in your vulnerability instead of hiding behind silence or strength. Naming the hurt is risky because it removes our armor. When we speak about pain, we step out of certainty and into exposure. We don't know how the other person will respond. We don't know if we'll be met with care, defensiveness, or dismissal. And for many of us, past experiences have taught us that honesty can lead to rejection. So we learn to endure instead of express. We tell ourselves it's easier to let it go. But unspoken pain doesn't dissolve, it settles. When hurt goes unnamed, it often reappears as resentment or withdrawal. We become colder, shorter, less available while telling ourselves we're fine. But distance is not healing. Avoidance is not strength. Naming the hurt is the moment we choose integrity over self-protection. It's the moment we say, "I'm not going to punish you silently or punish myself quietly." There is a misconception that naming hurt is an attempt to control or blame. In truth, it's an invitation. It opens the door to understanding, repair, and real connection. It says, "I value this relationship enough to risk discomfort." And it also says, "I value myself enough not to disappear." That balance is where courage lives. Naming the hurt doesn't mean demanding a specific outcome. It doesn't guarantee apology, change, or resolution. Courage is not about controlling the response. It's about honoring your experience regardless of the outcome. Even when the other person cannot meet you with empathy, you have still shown up for yourself. You have refused to gaslight your own feelings. It's important to remember that naming the hurt can be gentle. It doesn't require dramatic language or emotional overload. Often the bravest words are the simplest ones. "That hurt me. I felt dismissed. I needed support, and I didn't feel it." These statements are not weapons. they are truths. Courage sounds like naming the hurt because healing begins where honesty replaces endurance. Each time you speak your pain aloud, you reclaim a piece of yourself that silence tried to bury. There is a difference between honesty and exposure, and wisdom lives in knowing that difference. Not every space deserves your truth. Not every person has earned access to your inner world. Some environments lack the emotional safety, maturity, or respect required to hold what you share without using it against you. Recognizing this is not cynicism, it's discernment. But even when a space isn't safe, your truth still matters. You still deserve to acknowledge it, honor it, and listen to it. Many people confuse self-silencing with emotional intelligence. They tell themselves they're being strategic, peaceful, or understanding, when in reality they are abandoning their own experience. Discernment is not about denying the truth, it's about choosing where and how it is expressed. You can protect your vulnerability without betraying yourself. You can keep your truth intact without handing it to those who cannot care for it. The danger lies in confusing external restraint with internal erasure. When you consistently decide that it's safer not to feel, not to name, not to acknowledge what's real, your truth doesn't disappear, it turns into confusion. You start doubting your instincts. You question whether your reactions are valid. Over time, this disconnection creates a quiet loneliness because even you no longer know where you stand with yourself. Honoring your truth begins privately. It starts with naming what you feel without judgment or justification. It sounds like, "This hurt," or "This doesn't feel right," even if no one else ever hears it. When you validate your own experience, you reduce the power others have to define your reality. Self-trust grows when you stop arguing with your own emotions. Boundaries are what allow honesty to exist without harm. They let you decide who gets access and who doesn't. Saying less to the wrong people can be an act of self-respect, not fear. Silence, when chosen intentionally, can be protective rather than oppressive. The key difference is whether silence is a choice or a habit rooted in shame. You deserve your truth because it is the compass that keeps you aligned. Even when you don't share it outwardly, it guides your decisions, your limits, and your next steps. It helps you recognize when it's time to stay, when it's time to speak, and when it's time to leave. Not every space deserves your truth, but you do. And when you honor it, even quietly, you choose wholeness over performance and self-respect over approval. Belonging is often mistaken for fitting in. We learn early that being accepted sometimes requires softening our edges, editing our stories, and agreeing to unspoken rules that keep us included. But fitting in asks us to become smaller. True belonging asks us to be clearer. Clarity is what separates connection, built on performance, from connection, rooted in authenticity. Clarity begins with knowing who you are and what you will no longer pretend not to feel. It means understanding your values, your limits, and your needs, and allowing those truths to shape how you show up in the world. When you're unclear with yourself, you rely on external approval to tell you where you belong. When you are clear, belonging becomes less about permission and more about alignment. Without clarity, relationships often drift into quiet resentment. Expectations go unspoken. Boundaries remain implied. Needs are hinted at but never named. Over time, misunderstandings grow, not because people don't care, but because no one knows where the lines are. Clarity removes guesswork. It gives people the chance to meet you where you actually are, instead of where they assume you should be. Clarity can feel risky because it invites response. When you state what matters to you, you open the door to agreement or rejection. But ambiguity is not safer, it's just slower. Unclear connections may last longer, but they do so at the cost of authenticity. Clarity accelerates truth. It reveals who can walk with you honestly and who is only comfortable with a version of you that required less effort. True belonging doesn't come from being tolerated. It comes from being understood and respected. Clarity makes that possible. When you communicate openly, you allow others to choose you with their eyes open, not based on assumptions. And you give yourself the freedom to choose relationships that don't require constant self-editing. Belonging rooted in clarity also creates space for repair. When something feels off, it can be named. When harm happens, it can be addressed. Clarity doesn't eliminate conflict, but it makes conflict workable. It keeps conversations grounded in truth rather than buried in avoidance. Clarity creates true belonging because it anchors connection in reality. It replaces performance with presence and fear with honesty. When you are clear about who you are, you no longer have to chase belonging, you recognize it. It shows up in spaces where your truth is not merely allowed, but welcomed.